Hi, I'm Jason Juma-Ross. I'm a director over at Meta. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about just my experience of strategy and how it's evolved over the last decade or more working in this space with this organization. First of all, I'm going to outline why and why now, a little bit of that, and then we'll talk a bit about the meat around some of the strategic principles that I see that are changing and emerging and becoming important right now. And then we'll get into drawing the threads together at the end. I'll try and summarize and then give you a little bit of a stepping off point to start thinking about something else, which is a little bit beyond just the kind of functional strategy stuff that we're talking about today. So I think 2019 was the last time I was here speaking in this forum. So that was pre-COVID, for those of you that remember that. And state of the art in artificial intelligence back then was convolutional neural nets. We were all excited, at Meta anyway, about dense pose and being able to overlay meshes on bodies in the real world so that you could kind of understand intent. And that would feed into model understanding of the world and robotics pipelines and everything else. So it was an interesting place. But today, the landscape has been well and truly stolen by large language models, and at least for now. And so it's a very different environment, but the received wisdom today is obviously that AI is transformational. So I know we had a panel earlier on, and thank you, Josh and co. You resisted talking about AI until the last moment, but this is all going to be about AI. So, why do we take this seriously now? I'm going to just flick up a few of these things because there are lots and lots of papers from all of the big consultancies and other organizations saying that XYZ industry has the opportunity to benefit from machine learning and applied intelligence over the next decade or so. Telco's won 5 to 15% ARPU improvements from McKinsey, consumer goods. I think BCG is saying that 20% of the consumer purchase journey is potentially impacted by artificial intelligence. And in the gaming industry, where I also spend a bunch of my time, execs believe that within 5 to 10 years, up to 50% of development is going to get done by automated systems. And if you doubt the veracity of that, this is available in Horizon worlds today. So you write a text interface, and it will build for you a three-dimensional world that you can put into a VR system, and it'll build you the world, it'll drop you buildings onto the environment, you can develop NPCs and do a bunch of different things. So these tools are very, very real and emerging very quickly, and a consistent theme that I'll touch on throughout this is they're not just available to people with big budgets and big enterprise, they're available to everyone. So there's obviously a bit of a do-nothing risk attached to this. So I just thought it's worth raising that and touching on it. This kind of dangerous allure of wait and see. There really is an imperative now, and I'm sure all of your stakeholders in your organizations recognize that action needs to be taken in some of these areas. And so what I'm going to talk today is a little bit about, first of all, about the acceleration, and then what do we do? What kind of action can we take? So I've been saying this for more than 20 years, which means I'm old, but it's still true. If you think that progress is fast today, just bear in mind that this is the slowest it's ever going to be again. So this is what it feels like to be on the exponential curve, and we're right on the knee of it right now, and arguably we have been for the last couple of decades. You've seen lots of charts like this, these kind of up and to the right charts. This one's even more up and to the right than it looks because the y-axis is a logarithmic scale. But that is in terms of the number of parameters in machine learning models today. Now, parameters don't necessarily mean capability or usefulness, but there's a pretty decent correlation in the medium term. And you can see that a huge amount of complexity in model training. Now, the interesting thing about this, which is a little bit Javon's paradox, is that as the scale of that training has gone up and up, the unit costs are going down. So cost per token is decelerating at a rate of 2 times over the last couple of years, and that's largely driven, I would assume, by things like open source, being able to put competitive pressure into that environment. And so you're seeing this phenomena where capability is going up, price per unit is going down. Where's all of that going? It's worth looking at it in context. So, adoption is now scaling in terms of training loads at 4 times a year. In the context of other waves of transformation that we've been to, that's a lot faster than mobile phone adoption, it's a lot faster than solar energy implementation, it's a lot faster than human genome mapping. So this is a technology that's accelerating very, very quickly indeed. And if you want to get a view on what the use case is going to be and what's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years, all of our leaders in the AI industry are not shy of giving you their opinion, so it's worth listening to them. And I've just popped up 3 sort of aggregated things here from Mark and Jensen and other people. But where the puck is heading is that it's very likely that in 5 years' time, AI is going to surpass most human cognitive benchmarks. It's very likely that we'll have software. We've already got early signs of this software that improves and learns autonomously, and AI is going to be embedded into all of our devices, tools, and environments. like these glasses. I've got a couple of pairs of these I can show you in the break if you're interested. I was running this morning talking to my Meta Oakley Vanguards and asking about my heart rate, and they're telling me I'm not as fit as I used to be. So it's not all great. Okay, so what can we do about these new strategic principles? Let me cycle through a couple of things. One of these is, although those curves are all moving at a nice exponential rate right now in one direction or another, it's still very hard to forecast and very hard to predict. And when things are hard to forecast and predict, dividends accrue to organizations and people that can be agile. And so this made me think a lot about some of the principles that we used to set up our agile development teams back in the day, where culture was a really important factor. I know a couple of speakers have touched on the importance of culture this morning. Having a really subtle understanding of failure. Mark Rabkin at Meta used to say, be a connoisseur of failure. And making sure that goals are unified all the way down to the operational layers, so that the strategy goals of the organization are surfaced in everyone's KPIs. So those kinds of obvious things, but I won't go into it too much, but agility is really about building a culture of good Bayesians. So sure, you have priors, but you're going to update those priors when new information comes in, redo your forecasts, rather than just get stuck on your assumptions or your going in priors. Second one of these, I'll get into a little bit more detail, is just the importance of data. And if I'm kind of stealing this concept of being a good Bayesian from machine learning, this principle of learning from data is obviously very, very core to this whole thing. It's in the name, machine learning. And I'll give you a quick example from the core infrastructure that makes up our ads delivery system. So normally every meeting I had, people say, tell me how the Facebook algorithm works. Right, this is the crib notes on how the Facebook algorithm works. So it's a lot more complicated than this, but here are the 4 big things. So there's something called lattice. And lattice is a dense hierarchical ensemble network. So it's like a network of networks that ties everything together. And that allows you to optimize across a whole different range of surfaces and objectives within a single architecture. Think of it as a collection of different models. Second thing that's up here is Andromeda, which has been in the news a lot recently. The way that you can think of Andromeda is the first job in ads delivery is you have to filter from millions of potential candidates down to a few 100,000 potential candidates, and then the systems can select from those candidates to show what they're going to show to a user in very, very low latency, a few hundred milliseconds. And Andromeda is the architecture that allows for that to happen. Sequence learning is another really important part of this. Sequence learning is, I think we also talked a little bit earlier about people being in different stages of their customer journey. Sequence learning is the type of modeling that allows you to understand where people are in that journey and not keep showing them the same thing when they've bought the product already. So it's where are they at right now, and how do you help to progress them to the next stage? And then GEM is an architecture that just manages and passes a whole lot of that data at high speeds by using a modeling architecture rather than kind of hand-built rules so that it can speed everything up in the general case. Now, those are all different capabilities. It's a lot more complex than that, but the unifying thread is that all of those things depend on data. And obviously, as you all know, in machine learning, you're optimizing around a dependent variable. That dependent variable needs to be something that you care about. as an outcome rather than a proxy metric for something that's come through a kind of filter of a KPI architecture. So I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but let me leave it at this point on data being this growth engine and being even more important than ever it was, particularly those really crunchy dependent variables that the organization cares about strategically. Now, there's an interesting trade-off between simplification and scale here. And the first thing I want to touch on is simplification, because the irony here is with all of that sophistication, simple is actually the new complexity in this. So when you're training and using and deploying models in your delivery system, you want to give those models as much data as possible. If we do things like traditional market segmentation, where we segment the market up into 10 boxes, and we get signal from each one of those 10 segments, you're effectively training 10 models with not very much data, and they're not going to be very effective. But if you use all of that data and train one model, that model is going to be a lot smarter. And one of the things we've learned is that that model's probably going to be able to generalize across lots of different domains and surfaces and into other areas. And then the second half of this slide is you've got to give it time. So when you're training or transfer learning on a model, there's a lot of variation at the start as it starts to explore different areas of the vector space. And then over a period of time, when you get enough of those Y-dependent variables, success variables, and it starts to converge around an optimal. And you've got to give it a little bit of time to do that, not panic when it's going up and down at the early stages, but feeding as much high-quality data as quickly as possible into those models gives you the ability to get through that learning phase faster. And what we typically see on cost of acquisition is a 19-20% improvement if you let the learning phase run. The scale part of this is messaging and creative, and we talked a little bit about this earlier as well. But really the imperative here is you want to be able to not just make the one piece of communication or the one average good ad that appeals to the average number of your population. You want to make enough variations to cover the whole vector space and let the algorithm show those to the right people, because it's probably better at it than we are. I've got case studies and papers on that if you're interested, ping me afterwards. But obviously, a lot of platforms, our platform, third-party platforms like Canva or Leonardo or Adobe have tools that allow you to inject automation into these creative generation workflows now, and all your teams should be using those things to generate as much as you possibly can at the kind of lowest per unit cost of creative development. If you kind of get beyond that, you start to get into service. And one of the interesting things we're seeing here, and this is a big unlock, is being able to deliver increasingly more automated levels of customer service at the right point in the funnel. And this is a case really as well where this is not constrained, used to be constrained to large enterprise, but now it's being opened up to small businesses all throughout the long tail. So this is something we talked about a couple of weeks ago in New York. It is an automated sales agent that sits within WhatsApp. The flow comes up and says, would you like to initiate this agent? We can just train it on the history of your conversations that you've had. And then that will start to interact with your customers. And then the next thing we're doing is looking at how do we take that functionality, that conversational functionality, and take it from a conversation flow in a messaging agent and put it into an ad, or put that into a module on a customer's e-commerce site, so that you can really enable those conversational commerce flows across your surfaces. The fifth thing here is measurement. I don't like the word measurement, so I'm going to cross it out in a minute and put testing. Traditional marketing measurement lives in what I call this black box paradigm, where you're sort of analyzing the wreckage after the thing is over, and then you do an analysis and you produce a report later, but by then it's too late to do it. You're not making an impact. The chances are you've spent money, a bunch of money, on non-incremental customer additions or non-incremental profitability. So the way that you do this and the way that you get to grips on incrementality, when I talked about dependent variables earlier, you want to make sure your dependent variables are incremental. The big thing really is randomized control tests, or RCTs. All of the major digital platforms now have Pepsi Challenge, RCT-based metrics, the sort of things that only ever used to be used in pharmaceutical. But now those tools are available to everybody, and your analysts should all be aware of those and should be using those as much as they possibly can. So how about going from kind of execution back up into the strategy process and where we are with that? So I think, in this process, AI can be a real differentiator. So, across this room, you're probably all in stages where you've done some POCs over the last 12 months. You've got some case studies that you're running. You've identified some areas and use cases where you're looking to get incremental value out of that, and you're probably looking towards a future where let some of those things loose into the real world with human supervision, and generate this kind of more concierge-style interaction flows, both internally and externally. And so if we want to think about what are the use cases for these kinds of large language models, the three big ones, and this was data that was released last week, information seeking, writing, and practical guidance. Now this is a kind of a generic model. If you're looking at a more specific application space, those segments might be skewed a little bit. But if you kind of start with that, the main use cases, and flip that into the strategy process, you can start to see how this really enables, idea generation and development of counterfactuals, or helps you to develop bias mitigation and governance and all of these different application areas in the whole strategy flow and strategy use cases. I've got stuff on this. If you want, ping me afterwards. I'm going to pick two of these just to barely scratch the surface on, just to give you a hint. So, one of these is our traditional strategic research and market scanning process. So first step in the process, or maybe scoping first and then you do this. The traditional process, obviously, we were always taught not to boil the ocean, and that's still kind of good advice, but there's a lot more boiling that we can do with these tools than we were ever able to do before. So, these tools, particularly applied machine learning tools, give us the ability to discover a much wider range of options, to scan across vector sources, to do multilingual search, to use models and frameworks that you import into them or develop their own through self-supervised learning. And that just reduces your dependence on getting lucky, allows you to pass a lot more volume and simplify things down to core concepts a lot faster than you were able to do before. So I'm sure all of your folks are using models to do this in what used to take them 4 weeks to do in maybe 4 hours. Of course, that doesn't remove the obligation from you to be checking your work as this happens. Now, here's one small example of this, and this again is from our ads flow in the customer interface, so the business interface into our tools. So what used to happen 10 years ago is people would email us and say, hey, how's my campaign doing? And we would pull some data, do a PowerPoint pack, go see them in 2 weeks' time and present it to them, and by which time the campaign was over. Now there's a chat interface in the tool where they say, how's my campaign doing? It gives them all the metrics and then gives them optimization examples of how they should be changing things to improve their ROAS or their predicted lifetime value or whatever the dependent variable is that they're acting on right now. So that sort of level of personalized advice is it's possible now, it's coming, and you're going to see much more of that in systems as they evolve into the future. Second one of these to touch on is scenario planning. We didn't quite get into a broader conversation on this morning, but this is a really interesting area. I think you'll all remember Markov chains and Monte Carlo analyses and those spreadsheets that used to break all of the time, and you had this one model and it cost so much to develop it that you didn't, nobody ever touched it. It was kind of sacrosanct. It sat in the organization. These tools obviously give you the ability to develop much bigger, much more subtle models and many, many more of them so that you can run these simulations on a much broader scale. And so you can go through the list and kind of extrapolate out for the rest of those things. So I think there are a couple of implications here for the future of strategy. Everyone in the room knows this cycle, the OODA loop, developed in the sort of 1950s and 60s by John Boyd, a military strategist. But this is the observe, orient, decide, act cycle. The idea is you make that faster and faster. You make it faster than your adversaries, and that's how you gain competitive advantage. I'm going to beg forgiveness of the strategy gods, and I'm changing the name to a sort of soda loop. So the reason for that is I think that sense I don't like observe because it's single mode. We're sensing and getting multimodal data across all sorts of different sensory inputs here. We are orienting and building hypotheses, we are making fast decisions, and we are acting. And I think those AI tools help you to, one, speed up this loop. That's the first superpower. Second superpower is it allows you to create multiple of these loops and link them together sequentially. So you can move much faster from one to the other, and the strategy process really drives benefit from these superpowers. So faster loops, more of them, learning, adapting, and developing faster than your competitors is how you stay ahead of the pack. The last thing I want to leave you with is, okay, let's really step back and think about what are the structural implications of all of this stuff. Now, I'm going to, again, barely scratch the surface on this. There was a really interesting conversation a couple of weeks ago at our annual developer conference where there was a conversation between Michael Abrash and Richard Newcomb about the future of computing and intelligence. And if I can summarize that point, it's really that all human achievement is bottlenecked by this kind of one sensory channel that we have. Like it's one person, one mind, one conversation. Everything goes through that bottleneck. But from the printing press to the internet, any technology that has had a major impact on society has changed that dynamic and has allowed us to form organizations, whether they're universities or churches or companies, that are able to pass and assimilate information. They're able to make decisions and create collective action on the basis of those decisions in a way that outstrips what one single individual can do. And really, I think the implication of AI here is structural, because it's going to 10x that dynamic. So that capability of being able to create more complex organizations and yet coordinate information and decision-making is something that's going to be truly structural and transformative. And I look forward to working with you all on that journey. Thank you very much. Do we have time for questions? Yeah. I think I can do a couple of questions. Tell me when I'm out of time. I can do a dance if you prefer. Josh, yeah.
So I was just listening to an ACQ podcast
Okay.
with Toby on the way up. His positioning of this is we're at the end of the beginning.
Okay, yeah.
So I guess you talked at the start around the rate of feedback.
Yeah.
How quick do you think it could get versus how quick do you think it should be before we start to break?
So it's a great question. So I agree. I like this kind of framing that we're at the end of the beginning. Yeah, I think that we've spent a long time implementing the basic technology, and now we're spinning off of all of those networks and everything that we built. The rollout of fiber in the 90s and all of those sorts of things have laid the ground. Probably the big constraint now that everyone knows about is energy. So maybe that's one of the constraints. And if I flip back to one of my 3 slides on the exponents, there was that slide with the potential barriers to scaling adoption, and energy was the number 1 barrier in there. But what they're talking about is the potential over between now and 2030 is like a 3 order of magnitude increase. And so what does that mean? 3 order of magnitude increase is, if you're looking at parameters, is probably equivalent to the difference between GPT-2, which nobody had ever heard of, to ChatGPT-4. So it's a big shift. So I would expect between now and 2030 for us to be seeing that kind of momentum, maybe a 3 order of magnitude improvement of what we're doing today, which is pretty cool. Thank you. All right, great. We're on time. Thanks very much. Grab me in the break if you want to talk more.